So that one on the left is a figure from my book. And you can see this was a house that I used to visit quite a lot, actually. I've got to know the elderly lady very well, and that was her hearth at one of the many visits in the 1980s and 90s. An open hearth with a crane, very small, and with a clevy above it. And a clevy is a sort of, it's a type of spit rack, where in the Middle Ages your spit would be put on hooks above that shelf. And it's called a clevy, even though that doesn't have hooks anymore. So that's a very typical feature of traditional County Cork houses. And there's a butterbox stool on the right. So my son, who's very interested actually in this subject, luckily, went back to this house only a few weeks ago, and he took the photograph on the right. It's just about to be radically modernised. It's been purchased by people who I'm quite certain will eradicate what you can see now. It'll just look really different. So when the old lady died, she put in a stove, but the clevy is still there above the fire. The colours are different. The crane is actually still there. You can't quite see it, but it's there behind the stove. And you can see the wind machine on the right, which was for blowing the fire, which actually I never even realised was there because it was all covered in stuff. So that's a compare and contrast. Now I'm trying to move on and it won't move on. I don't know why that is. No, interesting little glitch here. Can't move on to the next slide. That's very odd. Oh, that's how we do it. Okay. So one of the things that turned up on Twitter was this amazing black and white picture on the right of a woman standing inside the doorway of a thatched house at a place called Pontoon in County Mayo. So I think it's early 20th century. And the thing that I'm interested in there is the stillion. So the stillion is a thing where if you didn't have running water in your house, you'd carry your buckets of water from the spring. And when you arrived at your house, you'd either put them outside on a stone bench called a stillion, and there's a bucket on that one, or you might bring them indoors and there might be a stillion inside that was often stone as well. So figure on the left, I published in my book. That's a house I used to visit in County Wexford, which was still occupied actually by an old man with no electricity. And you can see that stillion under his stairs. So the stillion turned up on my screen. I was very excited about that. And I think it's a wonderful portrait too of this working woman by her doorway. And then another stillion was brought to my attention through Twitter. So these aren't my photographs. Obviously the left-hand one is an archive picture. And you can see a much grander looking house, actually, a very different sort of house. And inside the back door, there was a back door to this house, there still is this recessed stone stillion, much larger with a stone lintel. And there you can see it on the right, photographed by the person who kindly drew my attention to it. So there you go. Another one. They didn't know what it was, and this is often the case. They just didn't know why they have this stone shelf in the house, and now they do. And I think they're interesting, archaic features. I'm sorry, I'm having to be very careful using a wheel on my mouse to move forwards. And then this is another little tiny house in Skibbereen, which is our local town here in County Cork in the southwest of Ireland. And I quickly became aware of the fact that one of the first things that gets eradicated when a house is bought and modernised, even slightly modernised, are these very, very steep stairs. They're very much like ladders. So that's what you've got here on the right, this kind of rusty orange colour, is these kind of ladder-like stairs, which were, you know, they economised on timber, they saved space, they were often turned into a cupboard, or they were boarded in underneath. They're supposed to stop dust coming through. And if you look at the house on the left, the stairs are actually just inside this door. They go this way. They go up and down on this side of the house. So somebody took those photographs for me, and I'm very grateful for that. And here is another set of stairs, very similar, also in County Cork. And you can see the house on the left before modernisation, top left, probably in the 1980s that was taken. And then bottom left, you can see I was lucky enough to be sent an archive picture, I suppose, of the house, probably around about 1950. I'm not quite sure when. But when you walk in through the front door, directly opposite you are these green stairs. Well, they're not there anymore. They're gone. So we're very lucky that this photograph was taken at all. And they were very dangerous, these stairs, because if you can imagine walking down them forwards, which you don't normally do down a ladder, you're likely to lose your footing. And in fact, in the same, there's not even a village, the same little tiny group of houses where this photograph was taken, apparently a woman died. She fell down the stairs that hadn't been modernised and she died. So that's really, it justifies this radical change that is one of the first things that happens to these little vernacular houses. Now, this is the house that is the inside of the house where you saw my first slide of me standing outside on inside what looked like a very low door. There's the door. And this is what was found inside really quite recently. It was brought to my attention by a young man who came to me through my website entry form. So glad that I got myself a website a couple of years ago, because this entry form, often fascinating little messages come in through it. So he said, oh, there's a house I think you might want to look at belonging to my neighbour. So the first time I visited, it looked like this inside. It had already been cleaned out an awful lot, but it's extraordinary because it's supposed to be, we're still dating it, it might be 1780 to 1820, this little thatched house. It's 3 rooms. As you can see, it's got this amazing open thatch underneath. It hasn't been sealed. There's no ceiling, which is very, very rare for them still to be open. And the 3 pieces of furniture that you can see here painted red, I have a hunch are the same date as the house. So they're probably pre-famine. They could easily be late 18th century. And it's incredibly exciting for me. In fact, the first time I visited, I was so excited, I couldn't even get my camera out. I was in a sort of state of overexcitement, taking pictures badly with my telephone. I had to go back and do it all over again. So we'll have a closer look at this now. Lily's encouraged me to dwell on this with a few different slides. But on the left, we have what's known as a clevy, and this is the dresser, and this is a press. So we'll look at them individually. Oh, if I can go the right way. So that's the ceiling before we start on the furniture. The ceiling is so beautiful. It's so neat. It's all made of riven split timbers. There's no sign of anybody having done any sawing on the small timbers, and the sugorns, the twisted straw ropes that hold the underside of the thatch down onto all these riven timbers. They're so clear and so neatly done. They're all symmetrical. It's lovely. And the last occupant, who died in 1977, and he lived there without running water, used to paint the underside of those boards up to about 10 feet, and then he'd stop. So that's why you've got this bit of whitewash and then no more. And the downstairs windows are fixed, which is interesting to see. They don't have opening windows, which is, I think, it's beginning to emerge as a common theme that the upstairs windows open, but the downstairs ones didn't necessarily. Very, very tiny little window, beautifully painted. So here's the clevy, and the clevy is, as I mentioned before, a medieval feature. I'm showing one on the far left that's a very elaborate one. And the one on the far left here, you can just see a spit still in place. There are some spits in the National Museum, but I've never come across a spit in place in a house ever. So that's a collector. And you can see these deep hooks which accommodate the spits. So that's what you've got here. Spaces for 1, 2, 3 spits put into these lovely deep hooks. And this type of clevy is one which is extraordinarily rare. I mean, we come across the very simple ones that you saw in the first slide over that fireplace, but this is really, I'd go to the National Museum to see one like this. So this is terribly exciting, and it's got big wide boards. If I could look at the back, I would expect to see pit saw marks, but I'm sure this is late 18th century, and we will be doing some tests to find out. It's a bit strange that it's not closer to the hearth, but that may be because it has a step back complicated hearth and it was difficult to fix there. Now, here's the dresser on the right. before anything was done to it at all. Every time I visit, a little bit more has been done to bring it back. So there it was before it was cleaned out from my visit. And here on the left is just one of those drawings that shows the kind of arrangements that you would expect to have found when it was occupied. And then this is interesting, this dresser, because it's clearly made by a wheelwright. It's obviously made by a wheelwright for various reasons, but if you came in with your buckets of water or your buckets of milk, you'd put them under this open base. So these early dressers very often have this open base deliberately, a little bit like a stillion, as a safe place to put buckets of water from the spring. Oh, there we go. So there's some detail. There's the open base a bit more clearly. You can see these chamfers, which are characteristic of a wheelwright's work. He used a spoke shave to create these lovely 45-degree bevels on the edges of square bits of timber. And we know that this dresser has sunk into the ground. It's become a lot lower because of the pattern of the way the chamfers disappear into the ground and aren't finished. So it's lower than it would have been. And this is very nice. There's a bit of decoration in the center. This very sort of simple cross shape. And then I noticed there were 6 holes for spoons, which on my third visit, the owner had kindly started to put some spoons back in the holes. So that shows you eye-level spoon holes, and there would have been 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 on display there, which is great. And he's found a couple of pieces of ware which were originally there as well. So that's the dresser, and that's exciting enough all by itself, actually. If there was nothing else but the dresser, it would have been exciting. But to find it in its original house is incredible for me. Now, this press on the left, I published as figure 291 in my book. It's a National Museum example, and I've put it in to show you as close a comparison as I can with the one that's in this little house. It has this carved rope moulding. This is from Limerick, actually, this blue one. So this is covered in hand-carved rope moulding, and it's got this sort of stepped forward cornice and fascia board and pilasters, which we've got in the red one, which is very elaborate. I mean, it takes an awful lot of work to do all those extra mitres and bring them forward. A lot of work went into this particular press. So also they were designed not only to keep food, but to keep an overflow from the dresser. If you had extra glasses or special china, you'd put them in the top of the press, and this arcading shows that intention to display, which you've got in the museum example, and we've got in this one. If you can see, it's very black, so it's hard to see, but there's a lovely arch here, and the fronts of the shelves are all shaped. And inside you can see the graining, the original graining. Underneath all the other many layers of paint, it would have started off with its original oak grained layer. And this photograph on my right, you can see some carving which is almost obscured by paint, and you can only just see it with the glancing light. So that's lovely to see. I mean, the paint has really, really beautifully conserved it, luckily. It's got bad woodworm, but the front and the sides are in good condition. And there's a couple more close-ups. So you can see this step forward rope moulding, dental moulding. You know, it's got classical references, chevron carving. It's a wonderful mixture of all sorts of different decorative details, which are so impressive and very hard work to do. And if you look on the far right, you can see how crisp the carving is on the inside arcading, which is, you know, setting off your display when you leave the doors open. It's absolutely lovely. It's just got black on it. It seems never to have been overpainted, which is wonderful. Very skilled, very beautiful workmanship of risk. This is the press which we measured recently to be quite sure that it could have been built outside and carried in or not. And it had a 2-inch clearance when we measured the front door and then measured the press. So it is possible that it was arrived there from somewhere else locally. And you can see that lovely open ceiling above. The bicycle in front of it, the owner, the elderly owner, who is kindly letting me go in repeatedly, said that he knew the old man very well, and he used to visit him as a child repeatedly and sit by the hearth and listen to his stories. And he said the old man that lived there used to use this bicycle, and he always put it there in front of the press, which is why he put it in front of the press for my second visit, which is very nice. And there's a lot of context which has yet to be discovered from this house. It's a very new project. And the last time I visited, he showed me, he said, for the last few weeks of his life, he went to the cottage hospital, and he said these are the pajamas that they gave him. And I thought that was just very moving and rather touching. And it also is a measure of the affection of the current family for the place. And it's a house on 41 acres. So this is probably my next project. And I think it will be eligible for grants for all sorts of positive conservation. Now, moving on. Another exciting thing that I found is called the settle bed table. And this isn't the one that I've just found. This is just to show you on both sides examples that I published in my book. So on the top left, you see it as a settle to sit on. Bottom left, you can see it opened out as a settle bed, which is a very common thing all over Ireland. Every county of Ireland has settle beds. But bottom right, you can see the back of it folded forwards to use as a table. So this is a triple purpose piece, a settle bed table, which is peculiar only to County Cork. And until a month ago, I thought it was just from East Cork. And I'd only found 5 or I think 6 surviving examples. So it was very exciting for me when I was told by somebody who'd read my book that her friend had this one. And this is a settle bed table again. It's quite different to the other ones. It has 13 panels on the back, and it's this wonderful color I really love. Overpainting is beautifully preserved with this paint. So you can see it on the right as a settle bed, on the left opened out as a settle bed to sleep in. Sorry, on the right is a seat, on the left is a bed. Sometimes these are painted so much that the table part, which is this bit at the back, can't be hinged forward anymore. So that's the situation with this one. It couldn't be turned into a table easily, although you can just see these little pins, which are the wooden hinges that allow that to happen. So now I've discovered it's not just an East Cork design, it's one that was found in West Cork as well, near Skibbereen. And when I look very, very closely, I could talk for hours about this, but I'll be brief. You can see a chip of the paint on the corner that shows underneath this lovely couple of different blues, reds and rusty reds and ochre and yellow and cream and probably all sorts of other colours as well, which we'll discover when we do paint sample analysis. And it's so thickly painted there, you can see on the far right the hook that holds the bed in place, which is characteristic of these settle beds. You know, each one made by the blacksmith in a slightly different way. Incredibly thick paint, which luckily preserves vernacular furniture in a way that is very, very lucky, this painted tradition, because pine furniture is so fragile compared to aristocratic mahogany or even quality oak. Pine gets woodworm very, very quickly. It's very fragile. So the paint is a great way of looking after it. And this is the house that turquoise settle bed table came from. And I went to the house, and then they said, actually, it had come into this house from another house. So I have yet to go into the other house, but it's still local. And it probably arrived as dowry with a woman who married into this house. So it's a space-saving idea, having 3 pieces of furniture in one. It would have saved money on making, it would have saved timber and space, but those particular ones are terribly grand. I mean, they really are elaborate. So they're extraordinary, wonderful, archaic pieces. And they're perfectly appropriate to today. They should and could be rebuilt and remade for small houses today. Now, moving on to butter boxes, which I've done a fair amount of work on. I'm very interested in the reuse and recycling of butter boxes. I work for the Butter Museum in Cork sometimes, and they've got a good collection of them there. But this one turned up in fieldwork since lockdown was opened up in Ireland. And it's nice because it's not been painted. So all butter boxes have got this sort of tapered shape that get narrower at the bottom. As a butter box, a bit like the one on the left, it just had a simple lid. Butter was packed into it, 56 pounds, and it was sent off, you know, from each creamery. So when you've got the marks on it, this one says registered number C116, and the 6 has been put in by hand, which is puzzling people. But C116 is Lisada and Muskery Creamery. So we can say that this butter box came from a creamery within about 15 miles of the house that it was discovered in. And it's got a stuffed horsehair seat put on top, which is really nice, with leatherette on the top. And it's got doorknobs for feet, so it can move around quite happily and stay off the floor. And I really like the all the handprints with the paint on them that have handled this butter box on the far right. And it was made by somebody called William Boyd. So there's an awful lot of information about this one. And they vary hugely. I mean, some of them are turned into sewing boxes, some of them are toolboxes, some of them have got elaborate upholstery and needlepoint. They're being collected now, luckily, in various different museums. They're being appreciated much better than they used to be. This is something else that turned up that somebody showed me. I was completely thrilled to see this. I've been working on horn spoons for quite a long time. And when I worked on horn spoons in the National Museum of Ireland, I was lucky enough to see their wooden spoon collection as well. And this is almost identical to one that I saw in the National Museum's collection. It's very light, it's very delicately made. You can see it in my hand on the left to give scale. And this pointed bowl is like the one in the National Museum. But it's great because it's got this sort of stencil decoration. I think it almost suggests that it's been cut out of a cork that's been used as a stamp. But there it is. It's probably around about 1800, that kind of date. It's hard to be totally sure, but it's a very, very lovely, very rare object. Very rare for a vernacular spoon to survive. Recently, I gave a talk in Nagel Place about milking stools, which wasn't something I'd really researched very deeply, but there's a lovely stool there from the Ulster Folk Museum on the right. You can see it's got splayed legs. It's much more complicated than it looks. It's more complex. A lot more thought went into it than you might assume when you look at something that looks that simple. So the splayed legs are very important. They've got 3 wedges on the top. And if you take your stool out to the field and milk your cow in the field, which is what a lot of people did, you can see how helpful it is to have either a 3- or 4-legged stool to keep your clothes off the ground. And there's somebody recently was telling me that they always milk the cow on the right. I mean, I'm sure some of you will know about that. I really don't know. And there's a lot of theories about it. But if anybody knows about whether they always milk the cows on the right by hand or not, please do say. And this is a can. This is a sweet can that she's milking into, which is something else I've researched. Tinkers made these cans and people carried them around and carried water and milk and all sorts of things in these sweet cans. So that's rather nice to see. Now, I started realizing that the stools I've been looking at in various places, one particular one that I remembered had these marks underneath it. And this is a really little tiny one, this big picture taken by somebody else for me, one of the curators, to show how they got turned over and used as chopping blocks. So if you have an earthen floor or even a flagged floor in your house, the last thing you want to do is chop your wood or chop your kindling on the floor and damage the floor. An earth floor is precious. So it seems that people turn the stool upside down and use them as a chopping block, and they might have used them to chop food as well, I suppose. So this is a really good extreme example where it looks like the bite out of an apple. It's just great. Quite hard to photograph to show that. And the one on the far right it also has these very distinctive chop marks. They're quite hard to photograph, just like tool marks are terribly hard to photograph, but there I am trying to demonstrate that multiple use of one object, which is absolutely typical of vernacular furniture in Ireland. Oh, and very quickly, this is one of the things I've been doing since we've been operating on Zoom. There is a dresser in the Ulster American Folk Park in Omagh, where I'm a research curator, and they wanted to redress it to a particular date, to 1818. So it started off on the left, and you can just see it evolving towards the far right as we get a bit more woodenware and more pewter and take off the spongeware, which we wouldn't have had in 1818. So this was something we did via Zoom. You know, we had, as you can imagine, a telephone used as a video recorder. We had discussions with curators, with lots of objects taken out of the stores and put on the table in the room. You know, lots of left a bit, right a bit. And we're gradually getting to the point where the dresser will look appropriate, which is exciting, to be redressing a dresser by Zoom. It's a new thing. Now, this is a photograph which was published by the National Geographic in 1941. And this photograph led me to a long, long trail of all sorts of different work. And it is Peg Sayers, and she's celebrated as an Irish storyteller. She's one of the most well-known women in Irish history, I would say, in Irish 20th century history, one of the most important. So getting a picture of her in front of her dresser, for me, was a massive achievement. I was so excited when I first saw this. And then, well, there was another photograph which showed her in colour, but it didn't have this right-hand side. So there were two photographs, one in colour, which was only part of this, and then this black and white one that was wider. National Geographic were very unhelpful. They just said, yes, use it, publish it, but they couldn't give me any more information. The nice thing is that the photographer in his caption says, because there's no electricity on the Great Blasket, which is the island off the coast of Kerry where Peg Sayers lived, natives collect as curiosities discarded bulbs that wash ashore. The Queen of the island displays 3 of the treasures on a shelf at the right. So actually these are light bulbs. There's one there, and one there. And I love that, the fact that she's displaying light bulbs. And then the other thing which she's displaying is fishing floats. And these really fascinate me. They are a local thing here on top of coastal dressers. We find them, and indeed I have them on my own dresser. And she's also displaying marmalade jars, glass jars. So there's this sort of magpie feeling of her using and displaying anything beautiful that's shiny, and there it is. So recently, via Instagram, somebody sent me this screenshot on the right of a colour version of the picture, and also they said they had 2 of the basins. So this was amazing. The basins on the dresser survive, and there you can see one of them. It's a really lovely one. I haven't managed to go and see it in Kerry yet. It's there for me to visit, but it's been difficult. And so there you can see it, and you can actually identify it, which is exciting. 2 of them, in fact. So it's a really lovely one. I'm very interested in spongeware, and it's actually an unusual pattern too. So there it is, sort of nested on the top shelf. And then there's this blue one top right, which you can identify, I think, I'm pretty sure, as that one there. So Peg's collection is coming alive. And this is one of these fishing floats, just to show you what they look like. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 on the top of her dresser, and there's one from the top of my dresser. And interestingly, they have marks, and nobody seems to know much about them, but we've had a discussion on Twitter about other people who've got them and what marks they have. And locally here, where I live on the coast in County Cork, people put them in, or they used to put them in the top of gateposts. And there is a bit of folklore about them denoting the fact a fisherman lived there, but I'm not sure about that. I think you'd probably put it on your gatepost if you had one, just to make it pretty. Then another thing that turned up, and I'm mindful of time here, which I managed to write an article about and then footnote in the reprint of my book that came out in February this year, comes back to Peg's dresser. So this little hanging dresser here, if you look closely, it's got these black dots, which are actually holes. They're drilled holes. So this is a central Kerry feature of vernacular furniture. There's a chair there from the same area, from central Kerry, with little holes drilled in the back of the decorative slats. And then there's another one here, which has got holes drilled in a different way. And then there's another one here with a couple of holes drilled in the back. And this turned up again, it's somebody else's photograph. So this is kind of putting the jigsaw puzzle together of a particular group of Carrie pieces. And I have published it now as an article. Well, I published it actually at the end of last year. So that's footnoted in my book. And it's called The Whole Story without a W. And these two chairs, the armchairs, have got this characteristic and rather idiosyncratic system here under the arm of these vertical pieces. And recycled bicycle tire seats, which are another thing which I won't talk about today. So unfortunately, the man that pulled this chair out of a skip in Kerry has since died, tragically, but he was a great collector and often sent me things like this, sent me photographs. I never met him. Here's a Sugorn chair, which is a little bit more widespread type. After they stopped using straw rope for the seats, they often use fishing twine. And this one turned up in a cafe that I was in not long ago. I couldn't resist photographing it. So that shows you what a Sugorn chair typically looks like. And I'm showing you this because the next one is absolutely amazing, I think. And it's so exciting to see this. This turned up, I think, from, it came as an entry form on my website. That's right, little message through my website. Somebody saying, oh, I've got a chair that you might be interested in. Shall I send you a picture? So of course I wrote back and said, yeah, you can send me a picture. I can't necessarily tell you very much from a photograph, but when this photograph turned up, I was so thrilled. It's extraordinary that a natural fork of timber has been used as the back of a Sugorn chair. Everything about it is traditional from the front half, but the back is totally unique. It's absolutely lovely. And actually natural knees and natural forks of timber were used by people who made wooden plows, who needed terrific strength, who didn't want to do the jointing that is involved in making complicated woodwork. So this is a one-off, and I haven't yet seen it. I can't get the correspondent to send me any more pictures, but it comes from West Clare, apparently. I might never see more than this, but it's totally thrilling. To me, it's lovely. I love this. This is a really good example of how you have, one furniture maker will just pick up a traditional idea and run with it and do something different. And that's what's so interesting about vernacular furniture generally. It's extraordinary that it survives. And here's another one on the far right. Those two on the left were published as chairs in my book with their white frames. So you've got the kind of the vernacular version of Chippendale here in oak, with a complicated, beautifully pierced splat in oak, and with that kind of construction for the seat. And then you've got something called a hedge chair here, which has got no structures joining the seat, everything wedged into a thick seat, and a kind of intersection at the back, which is typical. So when this one was sent to me on the right, through Twitter, through somebody who'd read my book, and then she looked at the chair in her house and she said, oh, I wonder if Claudia would be interested in this. And she contacted me very kindly and then sent me lots of photographs. This is lovely to have a pierced open, very, very simplified version of a Chippendale splat in a hedge chair. It's just so exciting. And there's a black and white picture of somebody sitting on it in about 1950. But the family don't want me to show that because it's private, which is fair enough. So I'm just showing this because it's a lovely example of yet another sort of hybrid form of hedge chair. And then this is another one that came from Instagram. There's the Ballad Hub Armchair that I published several of actually over the years on the left. It's kind of a tub chair, and it's very typical of a West Cork town called Ballad Hub. There's a cluster of them. So it's lovely that through Instagram, these little tiny ones turned up, 2 of them that somebody bought. And she sent me lots of pictures. So that shows you these 2, and they're very small, they're very low. Everything seems to be smaller and made for smaller people long ago, and this illustrates that very well. And then I'm going to start winding down now, or I won't get any time for questions. But this just shows you how people who didn't have tables used to eat communally. And actually this picture on the left, everybody seems to love it. It's a feel-good picture, and it came to me through, well, I should thank Lillis for this really, because Lillis put me onto the Moore Institute, the National University of Ireland Galway, where it all having this session hosted from there. And I've been a visiting research fellow there ever since Lilith told me to apply there in 2015. So this comes from the special collections of the library there. And it's actually also published by the National Geographic, and it's from a photographer called Cutler. And it shows people sitting around to eat their potatoes from a basket, using their fingers, and the basket is balanced on the pot that the potatoes have been boiled in. And they've got sometimes a plate or some cups in the middle. Usually they're using buttermilk or salt to eat from. And this is Special Collections Hardeman Library photograph showing this. It's very, very rare to have pictures of this. I mean, it doesn't seem like it because I'm showing you two, but it's amazingly rare that this is ever photographed. And this is probably salt herring in the middle. So there's a basket up there that shows that it's got a container for this central noggin of buttermilk or whatever you're putting in the middle to kitchen the meal. So having understood that, I will now show you what I discovered on the left in Armagh County Museum, which was said to be for salt, eggs and potatoes. So it's the same idea, but it's made by a wood turner. Instead of having a basket, you've got this lovely single piece object that does the same job for a communal meal for everybody to sit around and eat communally with their fingers. But on the tiniest farms, you often had a lot of hens. So boiled eggs were an important part of your meal. So this is really lovely, this platter. And I had a very strong hunch that this was something that would have been common, even though I only found one and found a photograph of another. I published this as figure 427, and then subsequently afterwards, as a kind of an affirmation, a lovely one turned up in Fermanagh and Omagh Museum, and this is their photograph of it. And when you look down on it, you can see lots and lots of little marks, which I think are the marks of fingernails, which is wonderful. It's again, and this one is supposed to be for salt in the middle, eggs in the middle section, and then potatoes around the outside, and it's nicely raised and it has a hollowed base. So this is all one piece as well, made by a wood turner. The wood turners used a pole lathe. They turned their wood green, and then after it was turned and turned into this lovely shape with all its detail, then it would dry and it would warp. So they've got this lovely kind of warped sort of shape, which tells me very certainly this is turned green on a pole lathe. So there are two of them. So it's not just one swallow doesn't make a summer. We've got two, and I think there'll be more. So that's an exciting new discovery, which I am publishing actually in an article that's going to press soon. And then there's another one on the left. I published these little stump-legged tables. There's one stump-legged table, and then on the right, subsequently, another one is turned up. So again, that's very nice that more are turning up as a result of publishing one. And I think it might be related to the falling table, which is something which people all over Ireland, in every county of Ireland, I discovered that they had these tables that were hinged to the wall, that could be hinged up against the wall to get them out of the way, or hinged down to be used. And there's a particular one that I published on the left, figure 290, from County Fermanagh. And then through Twitter, somebody sent me this great photograph of one that had been built not that long ago. So I got onto the person whose house it's in, and I asked him about it. I said, well, did you see my book? You know, because you have to worry that your book isn't influencing what people are doing. And he said, no, I don't know anything about your book. And this is just a table that was terribly common locally. And when we built this cottage, it seemed appropriate. So that was very exciting for me. And it moves along on this bar. So it can be moved to the left and used as a shutter, or it can be moved to the right and put out of the way, or, you know, it's just lovely. And I published several drawings and lots of dimensions for these because they're so useful. They're so appropriate to small spaces all over the place. And there's one from County Wicklow that's turned up again since the book was published. So that's nice to see. Lots of different versions. And finally, I'm going to move on to gods in bottles, or a god in a bottle. I'm not quite sure how you can turn it into plural, but one of my local grocery shops kindly sold a few copies of my book. And when the woman who runs the shop started to read the book, she noticed the god in a bottle section, which has always fascinated me. I mean, they're a bit like ships in bottles. They're not really magical. They're just clever the way the craftsman has put them in a bottle. But they have all the symbols of Christ's passion and a crucifix in the middle. And very often they've got holy water in them and a cork. So this one on the right being showed to me when I went into the shop was totally thrilling. I mean, so exciting. And I was there with my son, and we just took these pictures very quickly, and I haven't seen it since. But apparently it was owned by the owner's grandmother, and she had it in her bedroom. And it has all these little beads that look like eyes looking at you. And then the one on the left was found up a chimney in Wales, and that turned up on Twitter. So that was exciting. And they seem to be a thing that the Catholic diaspora, or the Irish diaspora, and Catholics generally treasured and made and built, and they were sold door to door. And there was somebody in Mayo, I think, who was a door-to-door salesman, and when he turned up at the village, they used to say, "Oh, here comes God in a bottle." So that was his nickname. And here's one that's turned up in Adelaide in Australia recently via Twitter. And another one also from the same place in Adelaide, an antique shop. And this, I've never seen these before, but it's the same idea. It's very clever. Little Sacred Heart pictures. So, and then perhaps more complex historically and more fascinating is one that came from Belfast, but the owner thinks it was from Portlaoise prison, Portlaoise jail. And it's got this engraving on it, which is, I suppose it does look like the kind of engraving you could do if you were in prison, perhaps with some kind of scratchy thing like a nail. When I did a rubbing of it the other day, it's clear that it says 1916 to women and man who fought Easter week. And it's in a Hennessy bottle, and you can date the Hennessy bottle. So I think it is all perfectly appropriate to sometime post 1916. So it's a piece of prison art as well as an interesting religious artifact. And I do hope that somebody will, perhaps Lisa Godson might do some more work on this sort of thing. And then my last slide, I promise I'm going to stop now, is being outside and not being able to get into people's houses during lockdown, which was frustrating to me. I discovered that gate posts all over the place used to be decorated using broken glass and broken china. So I've been photographing them. And there's a nice example on the right. And there you can see the detail in the middle of how it works. And then there's a really lovely one about a mile from where I live, where you can see the spongeware, very clearly, obviously treasured and then reused as decoration. And apparently plasterers specialized in this. So you might have a plasterer who would do this for you if he was able to. And it's a lovely thing to see, and I would encourage anybody to record it if they can see it locally. So they're just some of the things that have turned up since my book was published, and I'm terribly grateful to all those people who've gone on and on taking photographs of things until I'm happy with the result, or those people who just send one photograph, and many people who didn't want to be mentioned at all. So that if anybody's got anything else that relates to vernacular furniture, I'd be really, really keen to be sent it via my website at the bottom. And if anybody wants 20% off my book, Cork University Press have kindly agreed that they'll do that if you contact Maureen Fitzgerald at ucc.ie and quote that code ICF. So thanks very much. That's all for now.
Oh my goodness, Claudia, how fantastic. But maybe people would like to bring themselves back on screen, unmute, and we'll start taking some questions. I feel like I've been to the cinema and watched an amazing kind of like true crime film where things are uncovered, or I've read a really thrilling book being on that ride with you in the last 40 or 50 minutes. Absolutely fascinating, and I'm sure everybody else will agree. We're hearing that a review of your book is going to be in the latest issue. Has it already come out? The review of
Which one?
Book in Folklife, or is it pending?
I don't think it has yet.
Okay.
I can't
Okay.
remember. I'm sorry, but I've had quite. I'm trying to figure out whether it's been.
October,
Oh
Lilith
yeah,
put,
that's
so
why I
it's
don't know it.
coming
Yeah.
out. So
Oh,
that's
good.
very
I can look
exciting.
forward to that.
Very exciting. But yeah, so thank you for the heads up, because I think a lot of people will be going to University of Cork Press to try and acquire a copy now. So Claudia, I don't know whether you want to stop screen sharing for a minute.
You might. Should I press that red button that says stop share, Sarah?
Yeah, if you do that, then people
there we are. Oh,
there they all are. There they all are. There are your
Great.
wonderful friends and other people as well.
Good.
So questions for Claudia. Is Elaine waving, or is she? No, she's not. Bob's got a question. I think, Claudia, you might be getting, oh, I've got one of, or oh, I remember.
Good.
But that's all good, isn't it? That's all wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, on my website's easy to find. So if anybody wants to send me a message on my website, that's the way to find me. ClaudiaKinmonth.ie.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Bob had his hand up, so Bob, ask your question.
Yeah, morning, Claudia.
Good morning, Bob.
Fantastic talk, thank you.
Thank you.
Just look at, it's not the furniture actually, the one thing that intrigued me was the painted spoon. And I was wondering whether it had any links to Riga ware, which you get a lot here in Scotland, which is sort of came in with the herring fishers. So you get painted bowls and painted spoons.
Oh.
And it was the first thing that jumped into my head.
What did you call it? Regal ware?
Riga, R-I-G-A.
Oh, yeah. I really don't know.
Isn't it?
I mean, actually, that wooden spoon, it's like the shape of the one in the National Museum, but the one in the National Museum isn't painted. So it's a new thing for me. I'm not aware of it as a painted tradition. I'm aware of a spoon with decoration on the bowls that doesn't have the same pattern, but no, it could be. I'll have to look up Riga ware.
Yeah, there's quite a few examples in the folk museum, you know, so probably if you were to give Rachel a shout, they might be able to send you some pictures.
Yeah, that would be really good. In the Highland Folk Museum?
Yes.
Okay, well, I'll definitely look that up. Thank you. That's yeah, that's a whole new avenue. I was very excited to see that spoon. I mean, you can imagine how thrilling it was. I was invited in for a cup of tea, and then the spoon was put on the table, and I just thought, wow, that is great.